challenge makes us better, right? I think that if you look back at your life, you will see that you are who you are, not in spite of, but because of the things that you've been through, right? And so it's about, like, can we leverage these challenges into becoming better versions of ourselves, right? So that in some way I'm better today because of the crap that I went through yesterday.
If you're going to talk about resilience, you definitely have a story of resilience, and it starts from birth. This isn't just a story that a lot of resilience that we deal with in our lives comes from things that we create, choices we make, challenges we create. Yours was a resilience that was built out of a choice you had no control over. Share with our listeners a little bit about your story. At 1 year old, you had your first surgery. Just explain the scope of that, and then we'll kind of walk through to 23 when you kind of have the next major situation.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in 1978, and all through pregnancy, for my mom, everything looks good. Of course, technology not being what it is today, they were not able to see what they might have been able to spot today, which was that one of the valves in the heart was not opening. So when I was born, I turned blue within a few minutes. Doctors go, oh, something's wrong. Start running some tests, figure out that there's this blockage in this valve, and tell my then 23-year-old first-time parents, which as a parent myself now, I'm kind of like, I can't even, I was 30 before we had our first. So I can't imagine at that age, especially dealing with that. They say, look, he's got this massive heart problem. We need to do open heart surgery on him now. And we can't do it here, by the way. So he's going to be medevaced to another hospital, which is about a 3-hour drive. And they couldn't leave the hospital because mom had just given birth. So they actually watched as the helicopter took off and kind of started praying. And obviously, I'm still here. So obviously that surgery went pretty well. And then another one when I was 1 year old. And then, and the doctor said kind of like, just be prepared that he's got a long road ahead, and we don't really know what that road entails yet, but it's not going to be a typical childhood.
So you obviously started out with challenges, and your parents were building this resilience that you teach and help people with every day as well, because it's really not only the individual that's going through the health challenge, but everybody in your circle as well. And talk a little bit about that and growing up, because I'd like to get us to college where you come home and your mom sees you and obviously you're not healthy. And I think that will lead us into the next chapter. But just walk us through a little bit of childhood, having so many challenges and having the surgeries and the different type of childhood than maybe a healthy kid that nobody, you don't think of these things.
Yeah, totally. So I think one thing that you need to know for context is that both my mom and dad are phys ed teachers, and that's relevant, I think, because I think that's part of where this comes from. They made so many really smart decisions about raising me, and probably the most critical for me was to treat me as normally as they possibly could, and to allow me to explore, my limits and the world in general as freely as possible within limits, obviously. But so I would, like, despite all of the hard stuff, I was a competitive athlete until I was about 14 years old, and that I think is a big reason why I had that foundation of resilience, because, sport is a great way to learn about failing and overcoming and challenging yourself and losing and how to deal with all of those things. And so if had it not been, because they very easily could have said, okay, we've got this fragile child and we're going to like wrap him in bubble wrap and try and protect him and shield him from the outside. And they deliberately chose not to do that.
It's really interesting. I'll make a statement here. I almost feel like so many parents today are treating all their children like they're fragile, instead of actually allowing them to live, grow, be challenged, have the episodes where they build that resilience. They're trying to actually feel it first for them which is not preparing them for the very things that you had to go through. And as young as your parents were, what great choices they made.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and look, I'm a parent. I get it. You don't like to see your kids suffer. You don't want to see them in pain. But, I think if there's the trade-off of, can we allow them to have small failures and setbacks and discomforts when the stakes are lower, so that if and when, really when, because who escapes life without them, they face some bigger ones, they feel like, oh, I've experienced some things like this before. I kind of know how to navigate this a little bit because I've got some experience, as opposed to, wow, my life has been totally smooth and perfect until this moment, and I have no tools to deal with a challenging situation.
Well, and sometimes it's our own pain that we're just avoiding. It's painful to watch your children go through challenges. And I, as we were talking, I was thinking of little things that have happened to my boys over the years, and just things that, I remember them being in pain or having a super big challenge that they're working through. And the feeling that mom and I have in that situation is very, very heartbreaking, because you want to fix it for them and you can't. And it's completely uncontrollable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think they acquire, with our help, the skills to deal with some of those things, if when they're dealing with things that are maybe smaller, that maybe we can't even fix, we choose not to fix it for them and let them figure it out, right? Again, we're talking about low stakes stuff. I mean, obviously it's life and death, and we're not going to, let them hurt themselves. But, I like, you see people as early as when the kid's learning to walk and they don't want to let the kid fall down. And it's like, well, it's part of the process of learning how to walk, right? And unless they're going to bang their head on a corner and cut their head open and take them to the emergency room, then let's let them fall down, because that's part of the process.
Yeah, it's really funny. Think about teaching your firstborn child how to ride a bike. And as a parent, you can paint this picture in your head. I know you remember what it's like. I ran next to my oldest son, Carson, and I was so scared to let him go. And it was not about him. It was about me. And then it was about that trust and me providing that ability. And my second son, we bought this little bike with no wheels, we saw in Barcelona, and he would walk and run on this thing. And all of a sudden he was like 4 years old, and he just hopped on his brother's bike and rode it out and showed us that he could ride a bike. We had no clue. The differential was, I wasn't worried at all with the second child. I was like, oh, he's fine. He's been already practicing this. But as a parent, it is challenging. And so if I'm thinking about your two phys ed parents who are teachers, nurturers, obviously raising you in the right ways. You're 14, you did competitive sports, you learned a lot of lessons. Take us through. You end up going to college, and you're pursuing your second major, I believe, at the time. And you come home from school, and mom notices that you're not as healthy as she would like you to be. And it's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, you got it. So, I graduated with my first bachelor's degree and went to get a second degree in education. I was going to be a teacher like mom and dad. And I got home at the end of that school year. I had been away for 2 or 3 months since the last time I'd been home. And as soon as my mom saw me, she went, holy smokes, like, what's going on? Something's wrong. You've lost a bunch of weight. And I mean, I think I was a pretty stereotypical young guy in that, I don't get on the scale. Like, I wasn't paying attention, you know what I mean? Like, this just wasn't something I even paid attention to. And so when I weighed myself, I kind of got freaked out, because I had lost about 30 pounds in the span of 3 months, which is a big amount anyway. But then when you know that I'm like 120 pounds now, I'm only like 4'11", I'm tiny. So 30 pounds on my frame is a third of my body weight. Like, it's a lot of weight. And looking back at the pictures now, I cannot believe that I didn't notice, because I look like, skin and bones. And so mom saw that and was like, we're going to the doctor now. And I was admitted to hospital that day, and they discovered that I was in right and left-sided heart failure. And I'd been in and out of heart failure a couple of times before, but never this severe. And they ended up keeping me for almost a month while they stabilized me, ran some more tests, and then said, we need to get you a transplant like ASAP. Now, again, we'd been told for years ahead of that transplant was probably the end game, but it was always like someday, we're going to extend this runway as long as we can with medications and treatments and just trying to keep you healthy. And then in a span of 4 months, it went from that was the plan to like, you need a transplant tomorrow.
Wow. So when you need a transplant, what are the options? I mean, it's not usually easy to get a transplant, and you don't just need a normal transplant. You need a multitude of things replaced. Walk us through what that was like and what your choices were, and maybe what were the challenges and things that you were going through at that moment.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So transplant is not a simple process. Obviously, the surgery itself is challenging. In my case, they told us that because of the problems the heart had, one of which was the artery pressure in the pulmonary artery was very high, I needed the lungs replaced as well. So I needed a heart in both lungs. A very rare surgery. At that time, they were doing 2-3 of those a year in Canada. So I don't know the U.S. numbers, but I'm guessing, about 10 times the population. So they're doing probably 40-50 of those a year, maybe in the U.S. So they're not very common. And as a result, they're not done at every hospital around the corner, right? So in our case, we had 4 transplant centers in Canada that were able to do a heart-lung transplant. And lungs in particular, all organs in general, but specifically lungs, have a very short survival window between a donor and a recipient. So they only will last so long before they start to degrade. And at that time, lungs could last about 7 hours. Now, today, they've got new technology and they can keep them for longer. But because of that short window, in order to even be put on a list, you need to be living within a 1-hour drive of the hospital, because if and when a donor's found, right, you got to be able to get there quickly. So, and the closest medical center that could do one for me was Toronto, which is about 1,000 miles from where I lived. So we were going to have to move just to be put on the transplant list. So my dad and I packed our bags after I was accepted on the list, which was an iffy thing to begin with. Dad and I packed our stuff. We left my mom and 3 brothers home so that they could try and have some semblance of normalcy in their life. And we moved to Toronto to start waiting for this transplant.
Wow. And you had family again that stepped in and kind of helped you. You had a place to stay with your dad, with an uncle or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, my dad's aunt. When they found out we were going to have to come to Toronto, they said, "Look, we're empty nesters. We've got a spare room. You're welcome to come here." And actually, his cousin then said, "Well, you know what? He had actually recently gotten divorced. He had 2 young boys. He's like, look, come live with us. We've got space. I can use some help. And you're not going to disrupt our lives at all." So and I think it did. I think it helped. It was helpful for them, but it certainly was massively helpful for us, because rent in Toronto, big metropolitan area, was a significant amount of money, and of course, mom and dad are still paying a mortgage at home. So that was massive, and certainly helped alleviate one level of stress from an already stressful situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful moment to be 23 years old, to be the same age your mother was when she had you, going through a major surgery. What's the survival rate of a surgery like that?
So the survival rate of the actual surgery is not bad. It's like 70 to 80%. The survival long-term is what is the challenge. So the 5-year survival rate of a heart lung transplant is about 50%. So like basically half the people make it 5 years, because often what will happen is people will go into rejection because the organs, the body rejects the organs. And sometimes that can be stabilized, and oftentimes it can't be.
That's amazing. Have you ever met the donor's family, like in any capacity?
Yeah, no, unfortunately in our case, the process is anonymous intentionally to protect everybody's anonymity. And then the way that contact can be made is we're allowed to write a thank you letter to the family that's sent through the hospital. And if the family chooses to respond to that, then we can connect. And we wrote that letter and never heard back. And there are a variety of reasons why that might be the case. We suspect, based on just physical size. So, I'm 5 feet tall and 120 pounds. I was about 80 pounds then. There's a very good chance that my wounds came from a child. And as a parent myself, I can't even wrap my head around what that family would have been going through at that time. So totally understandable why they were not maybe ready to reply to us. So unfortunately, we don't know anything about them.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic, and the reality is how beautiful it is that life can be saved and built, and then you could impact 150,000 plus people over the course of your lifetime in the ways that you are and you have been since this day. It's an impact that goes beyond one life, and I think it's a pretty powerful thing. And regardless of how that family responds or reacts, the gratitude that you feel and that you felt, I mean, I can only imagine what it felt like to write that letter. Did you actually write the letter? Did your parents write the letter?
We both wrote our own because we had different perspectives on it, I think. Yeah, and we both had things that we wanted to say. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think part of, at least at a subconscious level, part of what led me to doing what I do is from this immense feeling of gratitude and this sense of debt of like, I've been given this incredibly fortunate second chance to do this thing called life, and I want to make sure that I use it as best as I possibly can.
Yeah, that's amazing. And during this process, walk us through, we talk a lot on this podcast about the acronym for life: love, impact, faith, and energy. And it's almost like you hit every category here. I mean, love, the who's in your life stepped up and helped you in a way that was challenging, and having family surround you in moments of challenge can just be so uplifting just to have them around, and then you have the impact of one life on another's, the impact of how you looked at this as a purpose that goes beyond the next level. It's not just, hey, I got lucky and here's where I'm at, and now I'm just going to go do whatever. No, you looked at it as a calling. This was a purpose for you. It was all about impact. And faith is something I want to touch on, because I believe that, you had a strong faith, your parents had a strong faith, and this was something that really guided you through. And we'll get to energy later, but faith is something that I wouldn't mind just attacking. I know it's not always the easiest subject to talk about, but it is something that probably helped, if I understand your story the right way.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not here today without it. I think we underestimate those of us who come from a maybe a traditional faith background, as I do. I mean, I'm a Catholic, and I've been going to church since I was a kid. And I'll speak for myself that I took that for granted as just kind of like part of my life until I was tested, right? And once you kind of encounter some tests, and you recognize that we can't do it all by ourselves, and you encounter situations where you realize how fragile life is and how sometimes powerless you are, it forces you, I think, at least it did for me, to go, okay, I'll do what I can do, but then I have to surrender the rest to in my case, to God, which is really hard. At least it was for me. But at the same time, very liberating. Like once you're able to do that, really do it, not just say it, there's a freedom that comes from that that's pretty remarkable.
It's a peace almost, I mean, there's a peace that comes with, first of all, controlling the controllable is all we can do. And when we feel like life is in chaos, it's usually because we're trying to control aspects of life that are impossible. And it's how we respond to those. It's the old Viktor Frankl, when everything's stripped away, you have that 1 second where you can choose how you respond, and that's about all you have.
Yeah.
But when you strip that down to allowing yourself to have that peace, that grace, that okay, I'm not alone. I'm alone in my thoughts, in my brain, but I'm not alone. Let me think of how I can put this and walk with someone else. It is powerful. I was born in 78. I'm also a lifelong Catholic. I was an altar server growing up. I did not have a major health issue in my life to make me go through maybe the rebirth or the re-challenge, but I've been through iterations in my faith that have been stronger and weaker like most people. And as I've gone through my 40s, there's been this really retrospective mindset and gratitude of the things I took for granted. I almost get chills just talking about it, because little things like the discipline I received from going to Catholic school, and the people that were in my life, and the ability when you hit a challenge to just walk in to any church on any block in any part of the country and just sit, gave me a feeling of such deep gratitude. And today, I'm constantly saying, hey, there's a morning mass somewhere, everywhere. And if you just need 30 to 45 minutes of quiet time, it's amazing how much I've been able to develop the spiritual aspect of my life. And I'm just relating it to not having had the health scare in that level of capacity, where you at 23 were given the ability, the doctor said, you got two options. Your option one is we get you a transplant. Option two is you need to go live life, son, because it might not be here for you in a year. And at 23, you can't grasp that. So faith to me is just that grace when you can really step outside of yourself, realizing you're not alone, and there's a peace that goes with that.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, absolutely. It's, and I think that's a challenging thing to do in a culture, in a world that tells us, that it's very individualistic, right? That the messaging all around us is just kind of like self-made man kind of stuff. And that's just not reality, right? I'm not here without faith. I'm not here without my family. I'm not here without this anonymous donor who I don't know anything about. Like, my life is my existence is dependent on all of those things. And that's an uncomfortable thought for some people, because they don't want to feel like they're beholden to something else, or that they owe somebody something, or that they're not totally in control. And that's not to say we have no control at all either. I think, that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is like, we have to let go of what we can't control so that we can control the things we can. But I think unless you come to terms with that, then you're always hampered, right? You're always kind of in second gear, because you're trying to control things that can't be controlled. And so therefore you don't have as much of your capacity available to you, because it's being wasted trying to grasp at things you can't fix, to do the things that you can be doing. I see so many people who are, spending so much of their mental and emotional energy on stress and anxiety and frustration about things that they can't change, instead of devoting it to the things that they can do something about.
Yeah, it's the missing link so often. Like, it's just that missing little thing that's so large in our lives. And so, I think faith is just something that a lot of people are afraid to talk about. And I think for our listeners, it's really stepping outside of yourself. If you break down faith, we're talking about God, we're talking about faith in something that we've grown up with. And, I also am grateful for my parents for providing that boundary for me. What a great resource for structure and growth when I fail, or when I'm challenged, or when I think I've made a decision that I can't come back from. It's really, really, it aids in resilience in a way that maybe goes unnoticed a lot. You've created a recipe for success in resilience, and they all begin with the letter A. There are 7 of them. Can you walk our listeners through? I'll transition here, because I know faith is something that's valuable. But if we talk too long about it, people will start to tune out. And I don't want to be preachy. I just wanted to touch on it because the 23-year-old kid, man, you went through some amazing things over the course of your young life, and to share that with the world is powerful. Walk us through the resilience roadmap, the 7 guideposts, if you will, just briefly, and maybe we can chat about that for a second.
For sure, yeah. And this, Scott, these steps came from reverse engineering the experience, right? So I tell folks in my presentations, it turns out, I found out in doing the research for the book, that all of these things are backed by psychology and science, but I didn't know that. When I developed it first, I just went, okay, how did we, and I say we because it's a family journey. Anytime someone's dealing with a major challenge like this, your family walks through it, right? Or at least the people close to you, whoever those people are. And they're affected in different ways than I was and vice versa. But how did we survive? And not just physically survive, but how do we mentally, emotionally keep it together? Why are we still a family together at the end of this? Because oftentimes the statistics on parents who have sick children is that there's a much higher divorce rate than other families. And it came down to these 7 things. And so the first one is acknowledge, right? So let's just let's face the fact that there's a problem here. And by the way, the whole idea of this framework is, I think it applies to every challenge we face, big or small. Obviously, if it's bigger, we're going to spend more time at each of the steps. Sometimes we're going to skip some of them if it's a shorter thing. But the first one is just like, hey, we got an issue here. Whether that's, you need a transplant, or it's, hey, I got to drop 10 pounds. Like, whatever it is, we got to face the problem first, or we're never going to deal with it. And then it's agency, which is, by that I mean personal agency. So our realization that each of us has the capacity and the ability to respond in some way. Now, we've been talking a lot about like what parts of things can we not respond to, or what parts are outside of our control, but there are always aspects that are inside our control. And recognizing that we have that power is important because, again, a lot of folks discount that, right? They go right to victimhood and say, woe is me, life isn't fair. And unless and until you accept that you have some responsibility in a situation, you're not likely to do anything because you feel like it doesn't matter. Then we go to acceptance. So what are the aspects I need to let go of so that I have more of my time and energy available to deal with the problem, which takes us to adaptation. We're dealing with a challenge, which means probably our lives have changed in some way. We need to change with it, right? So whether that's, I got to go and move to Toronto because I'm needing a transplant, or, COVID just hit and we have to change how we do everything in some capacity. Most of us as human beings resist change, and we make change harder on ourselves than it needs to be. And we blame that on change when really the blame lies here because I've failed to adapt proactively and I'm resisting and trying to hold on to what used to be. So we begin the adaptation process. And then sometimes people will say, well, okay, that sounds good, but I don't know about you. I feel like the world's changing faster and faster, and I feel like I'm adapting all the time. And I'm kind of getting tired of adapting all the time. I want things to just kind of stay still for a little bit. And that's probably not going to happen. I mean, the rate of change seems to continue to increase. So how do we sustain the adaptation? And that's where we come to aspiration, which is where am I trying to go? Am I really clear about what my goals are? My experience has been that when people know what they want and why they want it, and they're really clear about that, people can do some pretty remarkable things. Most of us have capacity we've never tapped into because we haven't pushed ourselves enough, and we haven't pushed ourselves enough because we haven't figured out something that we really want to fight for. And once we do, whether that's our family, whether that's our health, whether that's a career, whatever it is, suddenly we tap into this whole new level of capacity. And then finally, it's assessment. So every so often, it's important to kind of go, okay, is this working? Because, I skipped one. Action is in between there. So once we have the aspiration, it's put the plan into action. Again, I do something that most people call motivational speaking. And I'm not a super fan of that word, only because I know it's the stereotype that brings to mind for some people. And the stereotype tends to be somebody who's just like, rah, rah, you can do anything, like, go get them. And the flaw with that is, like, it's great to have dreams and goals, but if we're not going to then remember that we got to do something, we got to take some action, right? Nothing changes. So it's great to, like, write down your New Year's resolutions. But if you're going to live January 2nd the same way you lived the last year, then probably nothing's going to change, right? So we have to take some action, and then finally is this assessment where we go, okay, I've been taking action for 3 months. Is this working? Is it not working? Do I need to tweak something? Do I need to change something? This happens a lot when I work with organizations, companies, where they've created an action plan for a quarter or a year. And because they set that plan out and they put it on paper and they said, okay, team, this is what we're doing, they want to stick to it, even if it's not working. Right? Like, well, this is what we do. Well, okay, but if it's not getting you the result, then maybe we need to do something different. And so that's the resilience roadmap in a nutshell.
So you applied this, after you had your transplant. While you're in the hospital, you decide that you're going to run a marathon. And so prior to this, it was probably impossible, but now it was not probable, but it became possible. And because you set the goal and you had I guess, walk us through the why. Walk us through, you just went through the seven guideposts. What was your why? What was your purpose? And what was driving you to do this? And then walk us through what it was like when you accomplished it the first time.
Right. So, I think initially the why was, can I prove to myself that this is possible? In some weird way, I thought this is like the ultimate test of these new organs and my health, right? Like I'm feeling way better than I did before. If I could do that, to me, that would represent like the ultimate in health, because the context for everybody listening is pre-transplant, in the days, weeks, months prior, because of my heart issues, I couldn't like climb a flight of stairs without stopping halfway up, because I would get, winded, short of breath very easily. And so I thought, well, what greater demonstration of heart and lung capacity is there than to do some endurance sport? And I'd been a distance runner, so to speak. I mean, I'd run some 10Ks when I was a teenager, and I was always better at long and slow than short and fast because I was little. So I always joked that the big kids could go faster, but I could probably go further than they could. So I was more inclined to endurance sports anyway. But I thought, yeah, I wonder if I could run a marathon. And then it was the challenge to say, okay, how do I go from literally walking a few steps on a treadmill with hoses coming out of me, 7 days after the transplant, kind of very basic rehab, like walk again, to running a marathon? Like, what's that going to look like, and what's the path, and how long will that take? And in my case, it took 2.5 years. About 7 or 8 months out, I could jog a 5K very slowly. And by a year and a half, I ran a half marathon. And then go from the marathon to the full marathon took, another almost a year to get to that level of endurance. But once I did it, then I went, okay, bring it on, right? Like, if I can do that, then what else? What can I not do?
Yeah, it also brings up the value of setting goals for yourself and achieving them, even if they're difficult. When you're working towards a bigger purpose, you are more inclined to make adjustments, to adapt, to provide action. I mean, you had to break it down into such small little bites. You couldn't eat the elephant day one. You couldn't go run, but you could take one bite at a time, and that's really what you had to do, to the smallest level.
Yeah, 100%. You hit it, right? People who struggle, I always say, people often will, I'll get a phone call or an email. Hey, come talk to our group. We want you to motivate our people. And I'll always say, I can't do that. And I can't do that because I don't know what motivates each individual person in that room. Only they know that. But once they know that, and they may not even know until they've kind of done some inner work and figured it out. But once they know, then they're going to tap into that capacity in a way that they never have before. And they can do some amazing things, but they need to do the work to figure that out. And I can do some things to help them with that. So yeah, I had this big purpose to prove to myself that I could do that thing. And then once I did that thing, I was like, okay, well, what other things might I want to do? And the other thing, to your point, is when you do difficult things and you succeed, it proves to you that you can do that, right? It proves to yourself, oh, I can do these things. And so when the next challenge comes, you're going to have that armor with you of like, oh, I've done stuff like this before, right? And maybe I haven't faced this particular situation, but I've got this history, I've got this track record of doing challenging things. And so if I can do that, one of my favorite phrases to give my coaching clients to remember is, if I can do that, then I can do this, right? So go back through your life and go, well, wait a minute, I'm the same person that did this, and this. If I'm the person that did that, I can probably handle whatever this thing is, because 99% of the time, you're not facing the biggest challenge of your life today. You're facing something, right? And so you got to go back and go, wait a minute, I'm that same person that did that thing, so I can do this thing.
Well, we could always find that something. I mean, I think it's a misconception to think that people with optimism, positive mindset, resilience, like they just wake up that way every day. I mean, there are many times in our lives where you wake up and you're like, oh my God, this sucks. I don't want to do any of these things today. I am tired of this. I don't want to do this. I feel like it's never going to happen. I'm never going to win. And the key is to shorten the cycle of that. The cycle has to, like, you have to get it out. You have to acknowledge it. It's a true, authentic feeling that I know I have, and I don't have it very long. I mean, I do get it, and that's when I usually pray first, because I can't control. And the second thing I do is, if it's really overwhelming, then I start to write it down, and I start to go through my love, impact, faith, and energy, and I start prioritizing what can I control and what are the action steps I can start doing, and I get out of the way, because this brain of ours will take us down some horrible paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that strategy. That's I do the same thing. I'm a big believer in, whenever we're overwhelmed, the simple act of sitting down with a blank piece of paper and writing down everything you're stressed about will do two things. One, it articulates it for you so that you can actually kind of look at it and go, okay, here's what I'm dealing with. Two, my experience has been, when I write it down, I very rarely come up with as many things as I thought there were. In other words, they feel like there's more and they're bigger when they're just bouncing around in your head. And then when you get them out on paper, you're like, oh, is that all it is? Okay. So what do I do first? What do I do second? What do I do third? Right? And what can I not do anything about? So I'm going to put that to the side. So it's a super practical and very powerful thing that people can do.
You also a lot of times end up laughing at it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you write it down, you have the ability to have humor with your own challenges. And I think people take that for granted. Writing something down. I mean, I'm Italian, and I have lots of great Italian family members. And in that culture, there's a lot of worry. A lot of my Italian friends worry about everything. And, you know, what's funny is when you start to walk a worrier through what they're worried about, they will laugh at themselves. Mm-hmm. They will actually say, oh, okay, that's ridiculous. And again, walking through a worrier through the worry is something that we've had to do our own selves, because I can tell you, I guarantee, Mark, you were worried about all your surgeries, and you were worried about the end result, but you couldn't control it, so you worked through it.
Right. And you then, you know, I think we do that for two reasons. One, it saves us the mental anguish, right? There's a great quote from somebody about, you know, most most of the problems of my life never actually happened. That's a paraphrase, but the idea is like most of my perceived challenges were not actually even there. I just worried about them in advance, and then they didn't happen. But the other thing that happens is if you're not engaging in that, then that frees up the mental space and some energy, because we usually end up at the end of that worry a little more tired and a little more worn out than we were before. And now all of a sudden I have those resources available to work on the things that I can, which incidentally, if I don't address those things, might become worries in the future, right? I didn't deal with that thing, so now it's become a problem. So there's so much value in doing that. And one of the things, Scott, that jumped to my mind when you talked about, culture and worry, and you talked about Italians. I live in a region where a lot of Acadians and French Catholics live in our area. My wife is one, and I'm immersed in that culture as well. Similar thing, lots of worry and lots of. I don't think this is a cultural thing. I think it's cultural, at least North American culture, Western culture. We have this idea that like we've associated in our world worry and care. So in other words, when someone wants to express that they care about you, they will often express that in terms of, I was worried about you, at the other day, because I knew you were going through this thing and I was worried about you. And I think we need to separate that association. We need to break that association, because I can't tell you the number of times people have said that. Yeah, certainly for me, when I was going through my surgeries and things, about, oh, we were so worried about you. And I thought, that did nothing for me, right? Your worry had zero positive impact on me. All it did was torture you, right? So you wasted a bunch of energy worrying about me. And what you wanted to say is you cared about me, which is kind. It's nice. But like, unless that worry expresses itself in some sort of action of caring, then all that's happened is you've suffered and I haven't benefited. So rather than say, I'm worried about you, let's care for somebody and let go of the worry and say, well, I've done my part to do what I can do to support that person, and now I hand it over to them or to God or whatever our faith background might be.
Yeah. How about action? I mean, at the end of the day, if you're truly worried about somebody, the key is take action. It's not about worry. I love Dr. Kevin Oko says this. If you never heard him, he's great to listen to. He says, worry is praying for what you don't want. And when you're visualizing the result you don't want, you're actually negatively visualizing things and focusing on the wrong thing over and over and over again. Focusing on what you do want is what you have to reframe that to immediately. So, I write it on, I've been in the financial services industry for 22 years and 21 years, somewhere around there. And it's just adding up. But I used to write down, worry is praying for what you don't want, on a sticky note. And I would say, stick this on your computer every time you go in to look at your accounts, or you go in, because you are genuinely building this world where everything goes wrong. And nobody can help you in that world. Your kids can't help you. Your family can't help you. Your mom and dad can't help you. You're building a world of just worry and sadness, and I can't help you there. So, I do like to focus on reframing worry to action. And I also talk about empathy with action, because, so many people today have this deep empathy, but empathy isn't just listening and feeling what someone's going through. At a certain point in time, if someone's really going through something challenging, we should start to think about how we may be able to make a difference in their lives. Something as simple as, hey, Mark, I got a house that you know what, you can come stay in, and it's going to be a challenge for all of us, but we love you and we want you to be a part of our family. And if it gets you the heart and lungs you need, then you got it. Or, you know what, your family is back home and mom's probably struggling to feed the other 3 boys. And so maybe I'm just going to make some dinner and drop it off at the house. Like, this is empathy with action. Like, now it's actually has some legs to it,
Yeah, not 100%. Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what some amazing friends and family members did, right? They're like, okay, well, what can we do? Not, and they, they prayed for us as well, which I absolutely appreciate, and I believe in the power of prayer. Um, but
It's action.
yeah,
It's
that's
some
action.
action, right?
That's action as well, right? Yeah, absolutely. Some sent, cards just saying, "Hey, we're thinking about you." That's action, and it meant something. And we put those cards on the wall of my hospital room. Uh, but to the well-intentioned folks who were just kind of like sitting there stewing, yeah, you're not helping me, and you're hurting yourself, right? And so, yeah, I very often will chat with my wife about something and say, well, I'm not worried about it. And not because I don't care, right? But either I'm going to do what I can do, or I'm going to say, I hope that works out and move on to what I can do something about.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder to all of us. And I'm thinking about things right now that are people I know that are going through something or challenges that maybe I haven't had action on. So when we talk about these things, I think it's important for everybody that's listening to understand that there's no perfection in this world. It is completely the opposite. And part of the reason that we're able to talk about it and recognize it is because we failed at it before in our lives. And so it's something we recognize and start to apply on a different basis. And so, I think that I was prone to be focused on what I couldn't control. And I've worked really hard at self-talk and focus and reprioritization, and maybe several of the guideposts throughout my life, charting that course in chaos, and bringing that way to my life. I have a unique question that I think a lot of listeners struggle with in different ways. You got married. What age were you when you got married?
I got married at 26.
Okay. So pretty soon after your surgery, you meet your wife, you get married. When you decided to have children, how concerned, I don't want to use worry right now after we just killed it. How concerned were you? And I want to add context to this question, that your children that you potentially could have would be going through the same things that you did. And I feel like yours was health, but a lot of people wait to have kids, decide to never have children because they had tough upbringings, or they had a brother or sister that really, they watched them suffer and they can't ever feel that again. And you almost died a multitude of times. You watched your family go through these challenges. What was that like when you and your wife were making that decision to have children?
Yeah, great question. Certainly there was some concern. So we talked to doctors a little bit, and the general consensus was, of course, you never know, but the general consensus was, look, you've got three brothers who are all younger than you and healthy. So they didn't have this issue, which leads us to believe that it was not genetic, it was developmental. In other words, something went wrong in the developmental process in your mom's womb when you were growing. That just, it's just a fluke thing. It just didn't go the way it was supposed to. Because she had three healthy children after that. There's every reason to believe that this isn't something you're going to pass on. It was just a fluke thing. No, we did my wife was followed more carefully than a typical pregnancy for those things, just kind of to be sure. And again, we're blessed. Our daughter was born in 2008. So by then the ultrasound technology is far more advanced than it was when my mom was pregnant with me, and they could check things that couldn't be checked back then. Right. And so we had every confidence based on what they had seen in the tests that she would be fine. And she was. In fact, she was, our oldest Emma was in the 98th percentile for height, which was the really funny thing, because my wife is the same, very similar height to me. So we're both like 5 feet tall, and the doctor's like, your daughter's in like the 98th percentile for height, which is like, so she's going to be tall, which is kind of funny. But
are your brothers tall? Are your brothers all tall?
Yeah, my brothers are all over 6 feet. Yeah. So I guess I have those genes. Just didn't work out for me.
Yeah, well, maybe it worked out more for the inside. At the end of the day, you struggled and built the resilience from the inside, that no matter how tall you are, no matter how big we are, a lot of times we're very soft on the inside. And so building that from the inside out is very valuable, and that's a lesson that you could help teach your daughter.
100%. And, and then the ironic bonus is I spend a ton of time on airplanes now doing what I do. And it's always, I always kind of chuckle to myself because it's quite convenient to be this size when you're flying, coach on an airplane and I sit beside some dude who's 6'3" and 250 pounds and he's squished into his seat and I'm kind of, spread out and relaxed. So yeah.
I'm just under 6 foot, and I can tell you right now, I hate riding in the airplane. It is not made. It's made for people that are about 5 feet tall. It's not made. And when you come walking down the aisle, I'm excited that you're my seatmate too, because I'm just not having to share that seat with 3 times your body weight on my side. So that's 100%. A big win when you fly a lot.
No, you're right. It's a win in both directions, right? Yeah.
And when you fly a lot, you start to look at all these little variables that are so small, but you build a routine. Do you have any quirks or routines with your flight schedule since you are on the road quite a bit for speeches and coaching?
A little bit. I mean, so obviously I try and hydrate a lot because I've learned the hard way that if I don't do that, then I'm gonna be a little more tired and it's gonna take a little bigger toll. And no, I mean, other than that, and I try and get a window seat because again, then I kind of have my own little space and I can hopefully catch some sleep on the plane because I'm usually needing a little more. No, and then the only other thing is that I end up actually I choose to do a lot of early morning and late night flights, and the reason is because I'm trying to get to an event early enough to make sure that they're not stressed, but I'm not taking extra time away, right? So if I've got an event, I'm going to be there as early as I need to be, but not a second sooner, and I'm leaving as soon as I can within reason after I've done, taking care of my client. Afterwards, I'm not hanging out for a day to kind of visit the town because I want to get back and help my amazing wife who's working full-time and taking care of 3 kids at the same time while I'm gone.
It's a lot. That's always been something I've struggled with, in that, early on I did that a lot. And then I got to the point where I would come into a new place and I'd be like, you know what? I've been to this place 3 times and I know nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And I know, and I've never been to the coffee shop that I've driven past 5 times wanting to go. And I started to make adjustments and changes, and our kids got older and it got easier to do. And it's really when they're super young that you feel that, but you fall into that realm where when they're young, you don't really know when to stop doing this and when you could start doing the next. And I started taking just a little bit of time on the front end or the back end so I could be where my feet are, because I was struggling with rushing through life and staying too busy. And I think a lot of that shifted after COVID, to be honest with you. It just slowed me down so much that I enjoyed it. And I said, I am so tired of using the word busy. I'm tired of people saying, I know how busy you are, Scott. I know how busy your life is. I know my parents. I know you're busy. I hate it. And I wanted to fix it. And I'm still busy more than I want to be. I still don't like the word, but I'm working at it. It's something that I want to get better at every day. And so that's one way that I do it, where I try to build these little moments when I'm traveling. Like sometimes it's as much as a day before an event or something, I get in just a little bit early. I go to a lunch. I have a glass of rosé at lunch, and a really nice lunch, and I feel like I'm on vacation for like an hour.
Yep.
And then I move on. So, but I really enjoy hearing your story. I love, one of the best parts of hosting a podcast, Mark, is that I get to know so much about your life ahead of time if I've actually done my job. And it's really, really refreshing to get so many people on the High Performance Life podcast that are living life with freedom, that are living life in a way that's worth teaching to other people, and not in a way that's better than anybody else, not in a way that they have it all figured out, but in a way that your story is worth sharing. And I'd love our listeners to pick up the Resilience Roadmap, 7 guideposts for charting your course in a chaotic world. Mark is a living, breathing example, and has a big heart, the heart that and lungs that are definitely working in full capacity today, to the point where he's run marathons. Mark, how can people find you, and what are some of the ways that they can follow you if they want to follow you and your messaging?
Thanks for that, Scott. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so you can find me at markblack.ca, because I'm Canadian. It's a .ca, not .com. So markblack.ca is the website. The website for the book is the resilienceroadmapbook.com, although you'll find the book on my website as well. And then on all the social media platforms, it's just I am Mark Black.
Okay, and if you're looking for the perfect ideal speaking engagement or something, what are you putting out there? What are you most excited to do when you get invited in?
Yeah, the most popular, I've got 3 or 4 programs that I do. They're outlined on the website, but the one that's really popular right now is of the same title. It's the Resilience Roadmap, and I take what I call the core 4. So the middle 4 of those 7 in the book, because in a keynote usually you get 60 minutes or something, and I want to be able to do enough depth in them that it's not just a quick overview. So we do the core 4 there. And the idea, again, is to help people not just survive through challenge, because I really believe that if we're doing this right, challenge makes us better, right? I think that if you look back at your life and your career, you will see that you are who you are, not in spite of, but because of the things that you've been through, right? And so it's about, can we leverage these challenges into becoming better versions of ourselves, right? So that in some way I'm better today because of the crap that I went through yesterday, instead of just, made it through that. Now I can go back to normal.
That's great. Well, Mark, we look forward to following your journey. I have followed you on social media. I'm looking forward to listening to more of your messaging. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season coming up, and everything is great. And the Resilience Roadmap helps many more people. Here's to another 150,000 that you're going to help and impact in the future. So thanks for having the time to come on the show today, and I'm looking forward to connecting in the future.
Same here, Scott. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.